It began like many modern love stories do. Two people from completely different worlds finding each other in the blur of travel, social media, and fleeting moments. She was raised in a deeply traditional household where customs were honored and expectations ran deep. He, on the other hand, came from a culture that celebrated individuality and questioned old systems. When they fell in love, no one imagined just how far apart their worlds truly were. Their wedding was beautiful, a blend of both her conservative customs and his more casual, progressive lifestyle. Friends smiled, families watched with mixed emotions, and the couple promised to love each other despite their differences. For a while, it worked. They tried, they compromised. But the cracks began to show when their child was born. Suddenly, everything became a battle. What language should the child learn first? What holidays to celebrate? What clothes were appropriate? Even down to the food. Every choice was met with tension. But the breaking point came when it was time to enroll their child in school. She insisted on a religious school where cultural values would be preserved. He believed their child deserved freedom to choose and pushed for a liberal private academy. The arguments got worse. Harsh words were exchanged, walls were built, and eventually, love turned to resentment. They separated, and what followed was a legal battle that would shock everyone watching. The courtroom became the new battleground, not just for custody, but for identity, for control, for the very definition of culture in a modern family. As the lawyers argued, and the families filled the gallery, it became clear this wasn't just about two people anymore. It was about something bigger. If stories like this interest you, true human drama that challenges how we think, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for powerful daily videos that reveal the truth behind headlines. Let's explore what happened next. As the courtroom filled with quiet tension, the opposing legal teams prepared to present two very different worlds. On one side, Amal's attorney laid out a picture of a woman who had lived in silent suffering, bound by unspoken rules and expectations that were never her own. On the other side, Karim's defense was rooted in tradition, claiming he had only upheld the values and structure of the family he was raised in. Amal, dressed in modest elegance, stood calmly as her voice echoed through the courtroom. Her testimony wasn't just about broken promises or betrayal, it was about identity. She spoke of the pressure to obey, the expectation to shrink, and the fear of being labeled dishonorable simply for speaking up. Her words, simple but powerful, forced the room to confront an uncomfortable truth: that cultural values, when misused, can become a prison. Then came Karim's turn. He defended his actions by appealing to heritage. He described his upbringing, the roles men and women were expected to play, the belief that loyalty meant silence, that marriage was about endurance, not equality. To him, Amal's independence was rebellion, not bravery. The judge, a woman herself, sat listening with a growing storm behind her eyes. She wasn't just hearing a divorce case, she was witnessing a war between progress and preservation. The courtroom murmured as witnesses came forward. Amal's sister, holding back tears, revealed that she too had once been married off young, her dreams shelved for a life she never asked for. A former friend of Karim's admitted he had overheard conversations about teaching Amal her place. The tide was turning. But then, the unexpected happened. A community leader from Karim's side asked to speak. He walked slowly to the front and surprised everyone. "There is honor in tradition," he said, "but dishonor in controlling others. Our culture should guide, not chain." His words sent a ripple through the room. The courtroom was no longer divided by gender, but by mindset. Some clung to the old ways, others leaned into change. But in that moment, everyone was forced to choose silence or courage. The legal battle wasn't just about one couple anymore. It had become a reflection of a much deeper question. Can love survive when cultures clash? Or more importantly, can people grow beyond the beliefs that raised them? The judge's decision would be announced soon. But even before the verdict, something had already changed. Want to know what happened next, and how one ruling shook the foundation of an entire community? Keep watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real stories that challenge, inspire, and stay with you long after the screen goes dark. As the trial pressed on, the courtroom became more than just a legal battleground. It became a stage for two entirely different worlds to collide. On one side was Layla, fighting not just for her dignity, but for the right to define her life on her own terms. On the other was Tariq's family, deeply rooted in their traditions, struggling to preserve what they believed was sacred: the image, the control, the silence. Lawyers debated not only financial settlements and custody rights, but also cultural expectations, how a woman should behave, what obligations she has to her husband's family, and whether community honor should outweigh personal happiness. These were not questions the law could easily answer, but they kept surfacing, making the courtroom feel like a war zone of ideology. The judge, an experienced but visibly weary man, seemed to grasp the gravity of what this case represented. It wasn't just a divorce. It was a confrontation between modern individual rights and centuries-old beliefs. Public interest in the case grew wildly. Media outlets began reporting on it daily. People argued in cafes and online comment sections. The nation was watching. Then came the bombshell. Layla's legal team introduced private messages and recordings proving that not only had Tariq restricted her freedoms, but he had actively manipulated her finances, ensuring she would never be able to leave. One clip even had him admitting, "A woman without support can't go far." That's the way it's always been. The courtroom fell silent. Even Tariq's parents, who had sat behind him every day like statues, exchanged glances. The shame of what had been exposed hit harder than any legal ruling. Their son wasn't the victim of Western influence. They realized he was the architect of Layla's silent suffering. And then came Layla's testimony. Her voice didn't shake. Her hands didn't tremble. She stood and spoke about how it felt to shrink, to lose herself piece by piece for the sake of a marriage that was never equal. Her story pierced through the formality of legal language and struck something deeper in the room: empathy. When the session ended that day, there was no applause, just a quiet shift, a recognition. Something was changing. The final days of the trial had the entire courtroom on edge. Sarah sat quietly behind her lawyer, her eyes fixed on the judge. Opposite her, Karim seemed equally worn out, his confident posture from the early days now replaced with something much more human, vulnerable even. The courtroom had heard enough of the legal jargon and documentation. Now, it was about the emotional weight each side carried and the cultural systems they were both trapped in. Sarah's lawyer stood up for closing arguments. She didn't talk about laws, she talked about Sarah, about the strength it took for her to come forward, about how love should never come with the price of silence, and about how systems, be they cultural or legal, should never punish someone for standing up for their dignity. When Karim's lawyer spoke, he shifted tone. No longer did he deny or accuse. He acknowledged, he admitted that in many ways, Karim had failed to bridge the worlds he lived in. his heritage, and the country he chose to call home. But he asked the court to understand that this wasn't a simple case of right or wrong. It was a collision of two cultures, two expectations, two worlds trying to coexist. The judge took a long pause before delivering the verdict. Sarah was granted her divorce and awarded a share of the assets that had been hidden. But more importantly, the judge issued a powerful statement that cultural context could not be used to excuse manipulation or emotional control, that the legal system had a responsibility to protect people of all backgrounds, even when their situations weren't black and white. The case made headlines, not because of its drama, but because of its depth. It wasn't just a divorce, it was a mirror held up to society. In the weeks that followed, Sarah began speaking publicly. Her story became a catalyst for reform. Legal circles began discussing how to better protect spouses from coercive control, especially those navigating marriages across cultures. Karim moved away quietly. Some say he returned to his home country. Others say he started over, humbled. But the legacy of their case remained. Because sometimes it takes one brave voice to force a system to listen, one painful story to change the way we think about justice, not just in courts, but in relationships. If you felt something from this story, or if it made you think, please consider subscribing to our channel. We share real, powerful stories like this every day, and you never know, one might just change the way you see the world. Thanks for watching.